South Australia is a state in the southern central part of Australia. It covers some of the most arid parts of the continent. With a total land area of 983,482 square kilometres, it is the fourth largest of Australia's states and territories. South Australia shares borders with all of the other mainland states, and with the Northern Territory. It is bordered to the west by Western Australia, to the north by the Northern Territory, to the northeast by Queensland, to the east by New South Wales, to the southeast by Victoria, and to the south by the Great Australian Bight and the Indian Ocean. With over 1.6 million people, the state comprises less than 8% of the Australian population and ranks fifth in population among the 6 states and 2 territories. The majority of its people reside in the state capital, Adelaide. Most of the remainder are settled in fertile areas along the southeastern coast and River Murray. The state's colonial origins are unique in Australia as a freely settled, planned British province, rather than as a convict settlement. Official settlement began on 28 December 1836, when the colony was proclaimed at the Old Gum Tree by Governor John Hindmarsh. As with the rest of the continent, the region had been long occupied by the indigenous Aboriginal peoples, who were organised into numerous tribes and languages. The first British settlement to be established was King's Coat, Kangaroo Island, on 26 July 1836, 5 months before Adelaide was founded. The guiding principle behind settlement was that of systematic colonisation, a theory espoused by Edward Gibbon Wakefield that was later employed by the New Zealand Company. The goal was to establish the province as a centre of civilization for free immigrants, promising civil liberties and religious tolerance. Although its history is marked by economic hardship, South Australia has remained politically innovative and culturally vibrant. Today, it is known for its fine wine and numerous cultural festivals. The state's economy is dominated by the agricultural, manufacturing and mining industries. The state has an increasingly significant finance sector as well. History. Evidence of human activity in South Australia dates back as far as 20,000 years, with flint mining activity and rock art in the Canalda Cave on the Nullarbor Plain. In addition, wooden spears and tools were made in an area now covered in peat bog in the southeast. Kangaroo Island was inhabited long before the island was cut off by rising sea levels. The first recorded European sighting of the South Australian coast was in 1627 when the Dutch ship the Golden Zeepert, captained by François Thijssen, examined and mapped a section of the coastline as far east as the Knights Archipelago. Thijssen named his discovery Peter Knight's Land, after the highest-ranking individual on board. The complete coastline of South Australia was first mapped by Matthew Flinders and Nicholas Bowden in 1802. The land which now forms the state of South Australia was claimed for Britain in 1788 as part of the colony of New South Wales, although the new colony included almost two-thirds of the continent. Early settlements were all on the eastern coast and only a few intrepid explorers ventured this far west. It took more than 40 years before any serious proposal to establish settlements in the southwestern portion of New South Wales were put forward. In 1834, the British Parliament passed the South Australia Act 1834, which enabled the province of South Australia to be established. The Act stated that 802,511 square kilometres would be allotted to the colony and it would be convict-free. In contrast to the rest of Australia, terra nullius did not apply to the new province. The letters of patent attached to the Act acknowledged Aboriginal ownership and stated that no actions could be undertaken that would affect the rights of any Aboriginal natives of the said province to the actual occupation and enjoyment in their own persons or in the persons of their descendants of any land therein now actually occupied or enjoyed by such natives. Although the patent guaranteed land rights under force of law for the indigenous inhabitants, it was ignored by the South Australian Company authorities and squatters. Settlement of 7 vessels and 636 people was temporarily made at Kingscote on Kangaroo Island, until the official site of the colony was selected where Adelaide is currently located. The first immigrants arrived at Holdfast Bay in November 1836, and the colony was proclaimed on 28 December 1836, now known as Proclamation Day. South Australia is the only Australian state to be settled entirely by free settlers. The plan for the colony was that it would be the ideal embodiment of the best qualities of British society, that is, no religious discrimination or unemployment, and, as it was believed that this would also result in very little crime within the small cohort of initial settlers, no professional police were sent. The colonisation commissioners intended to establish a police service as soon as misconduct within the increasing population warranted it. In the meantime, temporary volunteer special constables, whose appointment was provided for under English law, would provide law and order. Neither provision was made for a permanent jail. In early 1838, the colonists became concerned after it was reported that convicts who had escaped from the eastern states may make their way to South Australia. The South Australia Police was formed in April 1838 to protect the community and enforce government regulations. Their principal role was to run the first temporary jail, a 2-room hut. The current flag of South Australia was adopted on 13 January 1904, and is a British blue ensign defaced with the state badge. The badge is described as a piping shrike with wings outstretched on a yellow disc. The state badge is believed to have been designed by Robert Craig of Adelaide's School of Design. Geography. The terrain consists largely of arid and semi-arid rangelands, with several low mountain ranges. The most important is the Mount Lofty Flinders Ranges system, which extends north about 800 kilometers from Cape Jervis to the northern end of Lake Torrens. The highest point in the state is not in those ranges. Mount Woodruff is in the Musgrave Ranges in the extreme northwest of the state. The southwestern portion of the state consists of the sparsely inhabited Nullarbor Plain, fronted by the cliffs of the Great Australian Bight. Features of the coast include Spencer Gulf and the Eyre and York Peninsulas that surround it. The principal industries and exports of South Australia are wheat, wine and wool. More than half of Australia's wines are produced in the South Australian wine regions, which principally include Barossa Valley, Clare Valley, McLaren Vale, Coonawarra, the Riverland and the Adelaide Hills. See South Australian wine. South Australian boundaries. South Australia has boundaries with every other Australian mainland state and territory except the Australian Capital Territory. The Western Australia border has a history involving the South Australian Government astronomers Dodwell, and the Western Australian Government astronomers Kerr Lewis, marking the border on the ground in the 1920s. In 1863, that part of New South Wales to the north of South Australia was annexed to South Australia, by letters patent, as the Northern Territory of South Australia, which became shortened to the Northern Territory. The Northern Territory was handed to the federal government in 1911 and became a separate territory. According to Australian maps, South Australia's south coast is flanked by the Southern Ocean. But official international consensus defines the Southern Ocean as extending north from the pole only to 60 degrees south or 55 degrees south, at least 17 degrees of latitude further south than the most southern point of South Australia. Thus the south coast is officially adjacent to the southmost portion of the Indian Ocean. See Southern Ocean. Existence and definitions. Climate. The southern part of the state has a Mediterranean climate, while the rest of the state has either an arid or semi-arid climate. South Australia's main temperature range is 29 degrees Celsius in January and 15 degrees Celsius in July. Daily temperatures in parts of the state in January and February can be up to 48 degrees Celsius. The highest maximum temperature was recorded as 50.7 degrees Celsius at Oodnadatta on the 2nd of January 1960. which is also the highest official temperature recorded in Australia. The lowest minimum temperature was -8.2 degrees Celsius at Yingala on the 20th of July 1976. Economy. South Australia's average annual employment for 2009-10 was 800,600 persons, 18% higher than for 2001. For the corresponding period, national average annual employment rose by 22%. South Australia's largest employment sector is healthcare and social assistance, surpassing manufacturing in SA as the largest employer since 2006-07. In 2009-10, manufacturing in SA had average annual employment of 83,700 persons compared with 103,300 for healthcare and social assistance. Healthcare and social assistance represented nearly 13% of the state average annual employment. The retail trade is the second largest employer in SA, with 91,900 jobs, and 12% of the state workforce. The manufacturing industry plays an important role in South Australia's economy, generating 11.7% of the state's gross state product and playing a large part in exports. The manufacturing industry consists of automotive and component manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, defence technology and electronic systems. South Australia's economy relies on exports more than any other state in Australia. State export earnings stood at $10 billion per year and grew by 8.8% from 2002 to 2003. Production of South Australian food and drink is a $10 billion industry. South Australia's credit rating was upgraded to AAA by Standard & Poor's rating agency in September 2004 and to AAA by Moody's rating agency in November 2004, the highest credit ratings achievable by any company or sovereign. The state had previously lost these ratings in the state bank collapse. However, in 2012 Standard & Poor's downgraded the state's credit rating to AA+ due to declining revenues, new spending initiatives and a weaker-than-expected budgetary outlook. South Australia's gross state product was $48.9 billion, starting 2004, making it $32,996 per capita. Exports for 2006 were valued at $9 billion, with imports at $6.2 billion. Private residential building approvals experienced 80% growth over the year of 2006. South Australia's economy includes the following major industries: meat and meat preparations, wheat, wine, wool and sheep skins, machinery, metal and metal manufactures, fish and crustaceans, road vehicles and parts, and petroleum products. Other industries, such as education and defence technology, are of growing importance. South Australia receives the least amount of federal funding for its local road network of all states on a per capita and a per kilometre basis. In 2013, South Australia was named by CommSec Securities as the second lowest performing economy in Australia. While some sources have pointed at weak retail spending and capital investment, others have attributed poor performance to declines in public spending. Olympic Dam. The Olympic Dam mine, near Roxby Downs in northern South Australia, is the largest deposit of uranium in the world, possessing more than a third of the world's low-cost recoverable reserves and 70% of Australia's. The mine, owned and operated by BHP Billiton, presently accounts for 9% of global uranium production. The Olympic Dam mine is also the world's fourth largest remaining copper deposit, and the world's fifth largest gold deposit. There was a proposal to vastly expand the operations of the mine, making it the largest open-cut mine in the world. But in 2012 the BHP Billiton board decided not to go ahead with it at that time due to then lower commodity prices. Government. South Australia is a constitutional monarchy with the Queen of Australia as sovereign, and the Governor of South Australia as her representative. It is a state of the Commonwealth of Australia. The bicameral Parliament of South Australia consists of the lower house known as the House of Assembly and the upper house known as the Legislative Council. General elections are held every 4 years, the last being the 2014 election. Initially, the Governor of South Australia held almost total power, derived from the letters patent of the imperial government to create the colony. He was accountable only to the British Colonial Office, and thus democracy did not exist in the colony. A new body was created to advise the governor on the administration of South Australia in 1843 called the Legislative Council. It consisted of 3 representatives of the British government and 4 colonists appointed by the governor. The governor retained total executive power. In 1851, the Imperial Parliament enacted the Australian Colonies Government Act, which allowed for the election of representatives to each of the colonial legislatures and the drafting of a constitution to properly create representative and responsible government in South Australia. Later that year, propertied male colonists were allowed to vote for 16 members on a new 24-seat legislative council. 8 members continued to be appointed by the governor. The main responsibility of this body was to draft a constitution for South Australia. The body drafted the most democratic constitution ever seen in the British Empire and provided for universal manhood suffrage. It created the bicameral Parliament of South Australia. For the first time in the colony, the executive was elected by the people and the colony used the Westminster system, where the government is the party or coalition that exerts a majority in the House of Assembly. Women's suffrage in Australia took a leap forward, enacted in 1895 and taking effect from the 1896 colonial election. South Australia was the first in Australia and only the second in the world after New Zealand to allow women to vote, and the first in the world to allow women to stand for election. In 1897, Catherine Helen Spence was the first woman in Australia to be a candidate for political office when she was nominated to be one of South Australia's delegates to the conventions that drafted the Constitution. South Australia became an original state of the Commonwealth of Australia on 1 January 1901. Local government. South Australia is divided into 74 local government areas. Local councils are responsible for functions delegated by the South Australian Parliament, such as road infrastructure and waste management. Council revenue comes mostly from property taxes and government grants. Demographics. Population. A majority of the state's population lives within Greater Adelaide's metropolitan area, which had an estimated population of 1,262,940 in 2011. Education. Primary and secondary. On 1 January 2009, the school leaving age was raised to 17. Education is compulsory for all children until age 17, unless they are working or undergoing other training. The majority of students stay on to complete their South Australian Certificate of Education. School education is the responsibility of the South Australian government, but the public and private education systems are funded jointly by it and the Commonwealth Government. The South Australian Government provides to schools on a per-student basis 89% of the total government funding, while the Commonwealth contributes 11%. Since the early 1970s, it has been an ongoing controversy that 68% of Commonwealth funding goes to private schools that are attended by 32% of the state's students. Private schools often refute this by saying that they receive less state government funding than public schools, and in 2004 the main private school funding came from the Australian government, not the state government. On 14 June 2013, South Australia became the third Australian state to sign up to the Australian federal government's Gonski reform program. This will see funding for primary and secondary education to South Australia increased by $1.1 billion before 2019. Tertiary. There are 3 public and 3 private universities in South Australia. The 3 public universities are the University of Adelaide, Flinders University of South Australia and the University of South Australia. The 3 private universities are Carnegie Mellon University, Australia, University College London's School of Energy and Resources, and Cranfield University. All 6 have their main campus in the Adelaide metropolitan area. Adelaide and Eunice are on North Terrace in the city. CMU, UCL and Cranfield are co-located on Victoria Square in the city, and Flinders at Bedford Park. Vocational education. Tertiary vocational education is provided by a range of registered training organisations which are regulated at Commonwealth level. The range of RTOs delivering education include public, private and enterprise providers, i.e., employing organisations who run an RTO for their own employees or members. The largest public provider of vocational education is TAFE South Australia, which is made up of colleges throughout the state, many of these in rural areas, providing tertiary education to as many people as possible. In South Australia, TAFE is funded by the state government and run by the South Australian Department of Further Education, Employment, Science and Technology. Each TAFE's campus provides a range of courses with its own specialisation.